Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most profound journeys the human mind has ever dared to imagine. Not a journey measured in miles, or even in years. A journey measured in generations. Somewhere out there, in the quiet dark between the stars, there may one day be a ship. And this ship will not be like any vessel we have ever built. It will not carry passengers to a destination the way a plane carries you across an ocean. Because no one who steps aboard this ship will ever step off it. No one who begins the journey will ever see the end of it. The child who is born on the first night of the voyage will grow old and die and be buried in space, having never touched a planet. And their grandchildren will do the same, and their grandchildren after them. This ship has to become something more than a machine. It has to become a world. A closed, complete, self-contained world, with its own air, its own water, its own seasons, its own farms and forests and weather. It has to hold everything a living planet holds, sealed inside a shell of metal, drifting through an emptiness so vast and so cold that our minds were never built to hold it. And here is the part that should keep you awake, if the softness of my voice would let it. We may not be building this ship because we want to. We may be building it because we have to. Because one day, for one reason or another, Earth will no longer be enough. And when that day comes, the only way for anything of us to continue will be to pour a piece of our world into a bottle and throw it toward the stars, and pray that the bottle stays alive for 1,000 years. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand why the hardest thing about reaching another star is not the distance, and it's not the speed. It's something far stranger. It's the simple, terrifying question of how you keep a world alive with no ground beneath it and no help coming for longer than all of recorded history. And you're going to understand something else too. Something about the ground beneath your own feet tonight that you have never once stopped to notice. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. Let's start where every long journey starts, with the reason for leaving. For all of human history, we have had exactly one home, a single blue world, 93 million miles from an ordinary yellow star, tucked into one arm of one galaxy among 2 trillion. Everything you have ever loved, everyone who has ever lived, every song and every war and every quiet morning, all of it happened on the thin skin of this one planet. We have never needed anywhere else. Earth gave us air we didn't have to think about, water we didn't have to carry, and gravity we didn't have to build. But nothing lasts forever. Not even a world. Our sun, the source of all that warmth and light, is slowly getting brighter. It burns a little hotter with every passing 100 million years, and in about 1 billion years it will be hot enough to begin boiling away our oceans. Long before that, a wandering asteroid, a shift in the climate, a catastrophe we can't yet name, could make this planet a far harder place to live. The people who think about these things, quietly in observatories and universities, have come to a conclusion that sounds like science fiction, but is really just arithmetic. If humanity wants to last, truly last, for millions of years instead of thousands, then one home is not enough. To put all of your kind on a single planet is to place every egg you have ever had in a single basket, and to carry that basket across a very long and very dark road. At some point, some of us have to leave, and the moment you decide to leave, you run into a wall made of distance. Look up on a clear night, far from any city, and pick the brightest star you can find. The light landing in your eyes right now left that star years ago, sometimes centuries ago, and has been travelling toward you the entire time, crossing the dark at the fastest speed anything can move. The nearest star system to our own holds a small dim red ember called Proxima Centauri, and it is about 4¼ light years away. That sounds almost close. It isn't. 4 light years is roughly 25 trillion miles. Not billion. Trillion. Written out, that is a 2 and a 5, followed by 12 zeros. Let me try to make that number real, because a number that large stops meaning anything at all. Imagine you shrank the entire solar system down until the sun was the size of a single grain of sand. On that scale, Earth would be an invisible speck, orbiting a few inches away. The whole solar system, out past the farthest planets, would fit inside a small room, and on that same scale where the sun is a grain of sand, the nearest star would still be miles away. That is what the emptiness between the stars is truly like. Not a gap. An ocean of nothing, so wide that even our smallest imaginable model of it cannot fit inside a city. Now, put a ship on that ocean. If you could somehow drive to Proxima Centauri in a car at highway speed, without ever stopping to sleep or eat or refuel, it would take you around 50 million years. 50 million years ago, there were no humans, no apes that walked upright, nothing you would recognize as an ancestor. The fastest object humans have ever built is a small probe that whips around the sun at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. And even that would need thousands of years to make the crossing. Our most famous deep space travelers, the 2 Voyager spacecraft launched in the year 1977, have been flying outward for almost half a century now. They have travelled billions of miles. They have passed every planet and crossed out of the sun's domain into true interstellar space, the first human-made things ever to do so. And if one of them happened to be pointed at Proxima Centauri, which it isn't, it would take roughly 70,000 years to arrive. 70,000 years. Let that number settle for a moment. 70,000 years ago, there were no cities, no writing, no farms, no nations, no books, no wheels. Our ancestors were small bands of hunters, scattered across a single continent, wrapped in animal skins against the cold, painting on the walls of caves. If one of them had launched a ship toward the nearest star on that very day, using our very best modern technology, it would only be arriving now. Tonight, as you lie here listening, every empire that has ever risen and fallen, every language ever spoken, every person you have ever heard of, all of it would have come and gone while that ship was still in flight. That is the true size of the gap between us and the next star. not a voyage, a wait longer than civilization itself. So we face a choice, and both paths are almost impossibly hard. We could try to build engines so powerful that they cross that gap in a single lifetime, tearing across the light years at a fraction of the speed of light. The trouble is that the amount of energy this would take is staggering beyond belief, more than our entire civilization produces in years, poured into a single ship. Or we could accept the distance for what it is, stop trying to beat it, and build something else entirely. A ship designed not to win the race against the void, but to survive it. A ship that carries not travellers, but a living population, generation after generation, for centuries, until their distant descendants arrive at a world their ancestors only dreamed of. That second kind of ship has a name. We call it a generation ship. And tonight it is the ship we're going to build together, piece by piece, problem by problem. Because to understand it is to understand something much closer to home than you might expect. And this is where it stops being a spaceship and starts becoming a world. The first thing you have to understand is how big this ship must be, and the answer is bigger than almost anyone imagines. When we picture a spaceship, we picture something like the vessels of our films, a sleek craft with a bridge and some corridors and a few dozen brave crew. But a generation ship cannot be that. A generation ship has to carry a piece of Earth's entire life support system inside it, and Earth's life support system is enormous. Think about everything our planet does for you, silently, every single second, without ever sending you a bill. It gives you air, and it constantly cleans that air, using an entire planet's worth of oceans and forests to soak up the carbon dioxide you breathe out and hand back fresh oxygen. It gives you water, and it recycles every drop of it through clouds and rain and rivers in a cycle that has been turning for billions of years. It grows your food, breaks down your waste, shields you from deadly radiation with a magnetic field 10,000 miles wide, and holds you to the ground with a gravity that has been steady since before the first life ever stirred. You never notice any of it. You have never once, in your entire life, had to arrange for your next breath to be manufactured. It is the most sophisticated machine in the known universe, and you have lived your whole life inside it without ever having to read the manual, or even know that a manual exists. Now imagine having to build a smaller version of that machine, from scratch, out of metal and glass and pumps and pipes and living things. And imagine that it can never break down, not once, for 1,000 years, with no repair shop, no spare parts you didn't bring, and no way to go outside and get more of anything at all. This is why a serious generation ship in the minds of the engineers and scientists who have actually studied the problem is not the size of a building. It is the size of a small city, or larger. More than 50 years ago, a physicist at Princeton named Gerard O'Neill set his students a simple question. Is a planetary surface really the best place for a growing civilization to live? To his own surprise, the answer he kept arriving at was no. And what he designed instead has haunted the imagination of every dreamer since. He imagined a vast rotating cylinder, miles long and miles across, with entire landscapes curving up its inner walls, Fields, rivers and towns on the inside of a giant metal tube. Great windows running along its length to let in sunlight, and a strip of blue sky and cloud arcing overhead. In his largest designs, such a cylinder could be 20 miles long and 4 miles wide, and hold millions of people, living on the inner surface as if it were open country, with a breeze and a horizon and their own artificial weather. Others have imagined a different shape entirely. Not a built cylinder, but a hollowed-out asteroid, a mountain of rock the size of a small moon, spun up and carved out from within, its stone walls left thick enough to shield the fragile life inside. A whole civilization living deep in the heart of a wandering rock, hidden from the radiation of open space by miles of stone. Whatever the shape, the scale is the same. This is not a vehicle you board. It is a landscape you are born into. A place with horizons and neighbourhoods, and a sky, even if that sky is only the far wall, glowing softly, a mile or more above your head. And already, before we have solved a single hard problem, you can feel the strangeness of it. Because a world this size, sealed and self-contained, becomes something almost alive. It has to breathe, it has to circulate, it has to heal itself. It is less like a car and more like a body, and like a body it can get sick. It can develop a fever, or a wound that won't close, or a slow disease that spreads through its systems one by one. The difference is that when a body gets sick, there are doctors and hospitals and a whole planet of medicine and knowledge standing behind it. When this ship gets sick, there is only the ship and the black. Whatever cure exists must already be aboard, or it does not exist at all. So hold that picture in your mind. Not a rocket, a rolling world, the size of a city, carrying everything it will ever have, falling silently through the dark toward a star that its passengers' great-great-grandchildren might, if everything goes right, someday see with their own eyes. Every tree that will ever grow on it is already a seed in its hold. Every drop of water it will ever have is already aboard. It is a complete and finished world, and the door has closed behind it forever. Now let's step inside and face the first thing that could kill them. The air itself. Here is a fact that seems too small to matter until you really think about it. Every breath you take removes a little oxygen from the world and adds a little carbon dioxide. On Earth, this is nothing. The planet is so vast, and its plants and oceans so many, that the breathing of every human who has ever lived barely registers against it. But seal yourself inside a metal world with a few thousand other people, and suddenly every breath is a withdrawal from a bank account that no one is refilling from outside. On our ship, the air is not free, it is manufactured. Every molecule of oxygen those people breathe has to come from somewhere inside the hull, and every molecule of carbon dioxide they exhale has to be captured and taken apart and turned back into breathable air again and again and again, forever. This is what we call a closed loop. And a truly closed loop is one of the most terrifying ideas in all of engineering. Because closed means there is no cushion. There is no more coming. What you have is what you have, and if the loop ever breaks, there is no outside to reach into. There is no window to crack open. On the other side of the wall is not fresh air. It is nothing at all. We know a little about how hard this is because we do it already, in a small way, high above your head. On the space station that orbits our planet, the astronauts do not breathe fresh air from Earth. Their oxygen is made aboard, split out of water by machines, and the carbon dioxide they breathe out is scrubbed from the cabin by canisters that must be swapped and serviced constantly. When one of those machines fails, and they do fail, it is a genuine emergency, and the crew works the problem knowing that a resupply ship of spare parts is only weeks away, that mission control is talking them through every step, that Earth itself is right there below them, close enough to see the lights of cities. That is the easy version. A few people, for a few months, a short call and a short ride from home. Now go bigger, and go longer, and take away the home, because we have actually tried the harder version, here on the ground, and the story of it should make you shiver. In the early 1990s, in the deserts of Arizona, a group of scientists sealed 8 people inside an enormous glass structure called Biosphere 2. It was a beautiful and audacious thing, a series of connected domes and pyramids of glass covering more than 3 acres. And inside it they had built a miniature Earth. There was a small rainforest and a tiny ocean with a coral reef and its own waves. There was a savanna, a marsh, a patch of desert, and a farm where the 8 of them would grow all their own food. The whole thing was sealed almost perfectly from the outside world. The 8 people who went inside, who called themselves biospherians, were meant to live entirely on what that little world could provide, breathing its air, drinking its recycled water, eating only what they grew, for 2 full years. It was, in a very real sense, the first small step toward the ship we are building tonight. A trial run for a world in a bottle. And it went wrong in a way almost no one predicted. Slowly, quietly, the oxygen inside began to disappear. Month by month, the level dropped. The air that had started out like the air at sea level thinned, and thinned, until it was like the air on a mountain miles high. The biospherians grew tired. They gasped climbing stairs they had climbed easily before. They struggled to finish sentences, to think clearly, to sleep. One of them later described the exhaustion of trying to do simple work while slowly suffocating, never quite able to catch a full breath. And the strangest part was that no one could figure out where the oxygen was going. It was simply vanishing, and the numbers didn't add up. The plants were making oxygen, the people were using it, but far more was disappearing than the people could account for. It took a long time to solve the mystery, and the answer was almost absurdly small. The oxygen was being eaten by the concrete. The structure was full of freshly poured concrete, and concrete, as it cures over months and years, quietly pulls carbon dioxide out of the air and locks it away in stone. That in itself was expected, but it meant the plant's oxygen was going into a chemical trap no one had properly accounted for. A slow, invisible reaction between the building and the air. A detail. An overlooked interaction between the structure and the atmosphere. And it very nearly ended the experiment. In the end, to keep the biospherians safe, the scientists had to break the seal and pump pure oxygen in from outside. The dream of a truly closed world, a world that could keep its own air, had failed on the very first try. Now hold that story against our ship. Biosphere 2 was 3 acres of real, living Earth, with real soil and real oceans and real forests, built by brilliant people on the surface of a planet, with a whole civilization of scientists watching every day, ready to help, ready to break the glass the moment things went too far. And it could not keep its air breathable for even 2 years. It was defeated by concrete. By a detail. Our ship has to keep its air breathable for 1,000 years, or 2,000, with no one watching, no one able to help, and no seal that can ever be broken. Because on the other side of that seal is not the Arizona desert. It is the vacuum of interstellar space, a few degrees above the coldest temperature that can exist, where a single open door means everyone aboard is dead within minutes. None of this is exaggerated. Every part of the Biosphere 2 story is real, and it is exactly the kind of small, unforeseeable failure that keeps the people who study these ships awake at night. It is not the dramatic disasters they fear the most, the explosions and the collisions, the failures you could see coming. It is the tiny ones, the overlooked reaction, the slow leak, the one detail in a machine of 10 million details that no one thought to check, quietly stealing the air, one breath at a time, over years, until it is too late to understand why. And air is only the beginning, because if you think keeping the air alive is hard, wait until you have to keep down itself alive. The very feeling of the ground beneath your feet. There is something you have never once had to think about in your entire life, and it is the direction of down. Down has always simply been there. It is where things fall, where the floor is, where your feet go. It is the most reliable fact in your world, so reliable that you have never once had to check it. It has never failed you, not for a single instant of your entire life. But in space, there is no down. There is no floor. A ship coasting between the stars, its engines silent, is in a state of endless falling, and everything inside it floats. And that, it turns out, is a slow poison for the human body. We learnt this the hard way from the men and women who have lived on our space stations. Spend a few months weightless, and your body begins to quietly come apart. Your bones, no longer fighting against gravity, no longer needing to hold you up, begin to dissolve. They lose more than 1% of their mass every single month, the body reabsorbing them because it no longer sees the point in maintaining them. In a long mission, an astronaut can lose so much bone that it takes years to recover, if they recover fully at all. Your muscles wither for the same reason. Your heart, which spends a lifetime working to pump blood upward against gravity, grows lazy and weak, with nothing left to fight. And the fluids in your body, which gravity normally pulls down toward your feet, drift upward instead and pull in your head and chest. Astronauts' faces puff and swell, and most troubling of all, that fluid presses gently against the back of the eyes, slowly flattening and reshaping them, damaging vision in ways that, for some, never fully return. A human being was designed by billions of years of evolution to live at the bottom of a gravity well, pressed against a world. Take that pressure away for too long, and we simply begin to come undone. One astronaut spent nearly a full year aboard the space station, longer than almost anyone, partly so that doctors could study exactly this. When he came home, he was measurably different from the identical twin brother he had left behind on Earth. His body had changed in dozens of small ways, some of which took a long time to reverse, and he had been weightless for only a year, with the finest medicine on Earth waiting for him the moment he landed. On a generation ship, there is no landing. The weightlessness would never end. Children would be born into it. Their bones might never form correctly. Within a generation or two, the human beings aboard could become something frail and unrecognizable, unable ever to stand on the very world they were travelling all that way to reach. So a generation ship cannot coast in weightlessness. It has to make its own gravity. And there is only one way we know how to do it, a way that requires no exotic new physics, only motion. You have to spin. Take that great cylinder, that rolling world miles wide, and set it turning, slowly, steadily, around its long axis. As it spins, everything inside is flung gently outward against the inner wall. In the same way water stays in a bucket you swing in a circle over your head, in the same way you are pressed into your seat on a fast carousel. That outward push feels, to the people standing on the inner surface, almost exactly like gravity. Down becomes the direction away from the centre of the spin. The floor is the outer wall of the cylinder, and the sky is the far side of the tube, curving up and over your head a mile or more away. Stand there, on the inside of that spinning world, and look up, and you would see something no human eye has ever truly seen. You would see land above you, not clouds, not stars, but ground. Fields and rooftops and rivers and lakes, hanging in the sky, curving away in both directions until they rose up behind you and joined the ground at your feet. You would live on the inside of the world, not the outside. There would be no true horizon that drops away into the distance. Instead, the ground would climb upward in every direction, a valley with no far end, wrapping all the way around above you until it closed the loop. Look up at night, and where a person on earth sees the infinite dark, you would see the softly lit farms of your neighbours on the opposite side of the world, hanging over your head, close enough that on a still evening you might see the tiny lights of their windows in your sky. And this false gravity would play tricks on the body that no human has ever had to learn to live with. Because the strength of the spin gravity depends entirely on how far you are from the centre. Out at the rim, at the floor where the spin flings you hardest, gravity feels almost normal, almost like home. But climb a ladder toward the centre, toward the axis of the spin, and you grow lighter with every rung. Halfway up, you might weigh half of what you do at the floor. Climb all the way to the very centre, and you would float, weightless, at the still heart of the turning world. Children born on such a ship might play in a weightless garden at the axis, tumbling and drifting in the air, and then climb back down into gravity to eat and sleep. And there would be stranger effects still, born of the spin. Drop a ball from a height, and it would not fall in a straight line to your feet. It would drift sideways as it fell, curved by the rotation of the world beneath it, landing a step or two away from where you let it go. Pour water from a jug, and the stream would lean. Run quickly in one direction and you would feel a little heavier, run the other way and a little lighter. And your own inner ear, the delicate organ deep in your head that gives you your sense of balance, would feel the spin every time you turned your head too fast. And until your body adapted, you would feel a dizziness with no cause that your eyes could see. This is why the engineers say the cylinder must be large and must spin slowly, no more than a turn or two each minute, so that the human body has time to make peace with the strangeness of it. This is the world those people would call normal. A curved land under a glowing spine of artificial light, where the horizon rises instead of falls, where the sky is farmland, and where gravity is not a law of nature, but a machine that must never ever stop turning. Because if the spin ever failed, if the great engines that keep the world rotating ever fell silent, down would simply begin to vanish. Slowly at first, then all at once, an entire world of people, animals, water, and soil would grow lighter and lift silently off the ground and begin to drift. The rivers would leave their beds and break into floating spheres, the lakes would rise into the air, and there would be no way to put it back without setting the whole world spinning again, from the outside, with everything inside already adrift. And speaking of soil, we have air, and we have a floor to stand on, and a false sky overhead. But those people still have to eat. And out here, trillions of miles from the nearest farm, that is a problem with no margin for error at all. On Earth, if a harvest fails, we grieve, and then we ship food in from somewhere else. There is always a somewhere else. A drought in one country is met by grain from another. A bad year is followed by a good one, and the storehouses of an entire planet stand behind every empty field. On the ship, there is not. The farms inside that spinning hull are the only farms those people will ever have. If the crops fail, no convoy is coming over the horizon, because the horizon is the ceiling, and beyond the ceiling is only the dark. Every calorie those thousands of people will eat for centuries has to be grown inside the ship, from seeds and soil and light that the ship itself provides, and then the waste of that eating has to be returned to the soil to grow the next meal, in a circle that can never once be broken. And a farm, it turns out, is a shockingly hungry thing, greedy for space and light in a way that is hard to picture until you do the arithmetic. To feed even a modest population of a few thousand people, you need a vast area of growing space, acres upon acres of it, lit for many hours every day by artificial suns that themselves demand enormous amounts of power. And it is not enough to grow food once. You have to close another loop, the loop of nutrients. Every scrap of waste, every fallen leaf, every bit of the people's own body's waste has to be broken down and returned to the soil to feed the next crop, endlessly, with as close to nothing lost as you can manage. On Earth, an entire planet's worth of bacteria and fungi and worms and insects performs this miracle for free. Silently, in the dark beneath our feet, turning death back into life without anyone ever thanking them or even noticing they are there. On the ship, all of that has to be recreated, understood, and kept in perfect balance, because the soil itself is not dead dirt. It is a living thing, a teeming, invisible ecosystem of billions of tiny organisms in every handful. And if that hidden underground world sickens, the crops above it wither. And so, eventually, does everyone who was counting on them. Then there is the terror of the single point of failure, and this is the one that has actually happened to us in our own history, so we know exactly how it ends. On Earth, life is spread across a whole planet in staggering variety. Tens of thousands of kinds of edible plants, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. A disease that destroys one crop leaves 10,000 others untouched. But a ship cannot carry 10,000 kinds of everything. Space and weight are the most precious things aboard, more precious than gold. And so the temptation is always to carry only what is most efficient, the handful of crops that give the most food for the least room and the least light. And a world that leans too heavily on only a few kinds of plant is a world that is only one disease away from starvation. A single blight, a single mould or rot that learns to eat the ship's main grain could sweep through those sealed fields in a single season and leave 1,000 people staring at rows of dead stalks, with 300 years still to travel. This is not a hypothetical. It happened less than 2 centuries ago on our own world. An entire nation had come to lean almost its whole diet on a single crop, one variety of potato, because it grew so well and fed so many in so little ground. And then a disease came, a water mould that turned the potatoes to black rot in the fields and in the storehouses, and it came back year after year. Within a few years, roughly 1 million people had starved to death, and 1 million more had fled across the ocean to escape the hunger. An entire people was broken by the failure of a single kind of plant. And that was on Earth, with the whole rest of the world to flee to, with other nations and other crops just across the water. Now imagine that same failure sealed inside a metal cylinder with nowhere to run, no ocean to cross, no other nation to beg from, only the void on every side, and a destination still centuries away. So the people who design these ships dream of redundancy, of backups, of never leaning too hard on any one thing. They dream of seed banks, great cold vaults holding the frozen seeds of thousands of species, so that if one crop fails, another can be brought out of the ice to replace it. We have actually begun to build such a thing on Earth, deep inside a frozen mountain near the top of the world, a vault holding roughly 1 million samples of seeds from across the planet, a backup copy of the world's crops in case of disaster. On the ship, a vault like that would not be an insurance policy. It would be the difference between a future and an ending. The designers dream of farms split into many separate sealed sections, so that a plague loosed in one can be locked away before it reaches the others. They dream of a food system so carefully balanced, so endlessly watched and tended and understood, that it could run for 1,000 years without ever once tipping over into collapse. And when you truly grasp how many things have to go right every single day for that entire time, you begin to understand a strange truth. The hardest machine we will ever build is not an engine, or a reactor, or a computer. It is a garden that can never, for 1,000 years, be allowed to die. But even a perfect garden, A perfect sky and perfect air are not enough, because the ship does not only have to keep bodies alive, it has to carry people, living, thinking, feeling people who are born and who love and who grieve and who die. And people, it turns out, are the strangest and most difficult cargo of all. Let's talk about the passengers now, not as a crew, but as something we have never had to think about before. A population that lives and dies entirely in flight, most of them never once touching solid ground. Here is the quiet horror at the very heart of the generation ship, the thing that sets it apart from every other journey humans have ever made. The people who launch it will never arrive. They know this before they leave. They will board this ship, this rolling world, in the full knowledge that they are saying goodbye to planets forever, that they will spend their entire lives inside these curving metal walls, and that they will grow old and die inside them, and be gone, long gone, centuries gone, before the ship ever reaches the star it is aimed at. The voyage will outlive them by 20 generations, by 40. They are not travellers in any sense we have ever meant by the word. A traveller goes somewhere. These people are going nowhere they will ever see. They are the first link in a chain of human lives so long that the far end of it is completely invisible from where they stand, lost in a future they will never share. Imagine being one of them. Imagine choosing it. Imagine standing at a window on the first night, watching Earth shrink behind you, that whole blue world with everyone and everything you have ever known on it, and understanding, truly understanding, that this is the last time any human eye related to you will ever see it grow small. Because you will be the only one who remembers it. Your children will be born already in flight. To them, that shrinking blue dot will be a story you tell, and you will spend the rest of your days building a world for people you will never meet, tending a garden whose final harvest is 400 years away. And then there are the children, the ones born not at the beginning, when the mission is fresh and the volunteers still remember why they came, but in the deep middle centuries, when Earth is an old story the eldest tell, and the destination is still a story no one alive will live to see. These children never chose to be on the ship. They were born into it, into a world with metal walls and a farmed sky, a world that is moving toward a place they will never reach, away from a place they will never know. They will look up at that glowing spine of light running down the centre of their world and call it the sun, because it is the only sun they have ever had. They will learn about oceans from recordings, about mountains from old pictures, about the real sky, the true infinite blue dome of an open planet, from stories that grow fainter and stranger and harder to believe with every passing generation. To them, the ship is not a spaceship at all. The ship is simply the world. It is where reality is, the complete and total extent of everything, in exactly the way this planet is simply where reality is for you, tonight, without your ever having to think about it. And this raises a question that is not about engineering at all, but about biology, and it is one of the most brutal questions in the whole endeavour. How many people do you need to start with to keep a healthy human population going for 1,000 years entirely on its own, with no new blood arriving from outside ever again? Because if you start with too few, something quiet and terrible begins to happen across the generations. It is a slow trap, and it is written into our very cells. Every one of us carries hidden flaws in our genes, broken instructions that do no harm because we carry a healthy copy alongside them. But in a small, closed population, the same families marry the same families over and over, generation after generation, and those hidden flaws begin to line up. Broken copy meets broken copy. Children are born weaker, sicker, more prone to disease, less able to survive and to have healthy children of their own. Scientists have watched this happen in small isolated populations on Earth, in valleys and on islands cut off from the wider world, and they have a name for it: the narrowing of the blood. Researchers have argued for years about the magic number, the smallest population that could safely make the crossing without slowly strangling its own gene pool. Some early hopeful estimates suggested that a mere handful of people, a few dozen, might be enough. More careful work has pushed that number far higher. Some now argue you would need many hundreds of carefully chosen people, and others insist the true safe number is in the many thousands, or even the tens of thousands, if you want to be truly certain that 1,000 years of births and marriages and deaths never accidentally narrows the family tree into something fragile and doomed. Too few, and the ship's greatest enemy is not the cold outside, or the radiation, or the failing machines. It is the slow, silent, inward collapse of its own bloodline, a disaster that no shield and no engine can prevent. So the ship must carry not just people, but the right number of people, carefully chosen and carefully mixed. And it must somehow make sure that 40 generations of falling in love and having children never accidentally strangles the tiny pool of genes it set out with. Some designers, thinking coldly about the problem, have imagined solving it with more than living passengers. They imagine the ship carrying banks of frozen genetic material, a great cold library of human diversity, thousands of potential lives held in ice, so that the living population can be constantly refreshed and widened, never allowed to grow too narrow. A ship that carries not only its passengers, but the sleeping, frozen potential of thousands more, waiting in the cold and the dark to join the family tree and keep it strong. A world where the future population is not left entirely to chance and love, but managed, carefully, across the centuries, like tending the health of a single vast and precious family. Sit with that for a moment. A world where the number of children is not only a matter of the heart, but of survival mathematics, where the eldest remember an earth the young will never believe in, where every child born is both a passenger and a link, carrying not only their own small life, but the whole future of the entire voyage in their blood. That is the true human cargo of the generation ship, not heroes on a grand adventure. A whole civilization poured carefully into a bottle, trying with everything it has to stay whole and healthy and sane in the dark for longer than any civilization on Earth has ever managed to last. And a civilization in a bottle has to be governed and remembered and held together, which brings us to a danger far quieter and far stranger than any failing machine. The danger of forgetting. Imagine you are born on the ship 10 generations into the voyage. 250 years have passed since the launch. Everyone who ever saw Earth with their own eyes has been dead for 2 centuries. Your great-great-great-grandparents were children when the ship left, and even they only half remembered a home they had barely known. To you, the stories of a blue planet, of endless oceans and open sky and a sun you could actually feel warm on your skin, are old myths, no more solid or believable than the tales of gods and giants were to the people of the ancient world. You have never seen a horizon that fell away into the distance. You have never felt rain that wasn't switched on by a schedule. You have never known a night that wasn't dimmed by a timer, or a storm that wasn't planned. The ship is not your vehicle. The ship is your entire universe, and the strange idea that it is going somewhere, that it is even a ship at all, that these walls are moving through some vast outside, has begun to feel like a superstition the old people cling to. This is perhaps the very deepest danger of the whole endeavour, and it is not a danger of metal or physics at all. It is a danger of memory. A generation ship is not only a machine that must keep working for 1,000 years, it is a society that must keep believing for 1,000 years. It must keep believing in a mission that no one currently alive ever chose, that was launched by people no one currently alive ever met, aimed at a destination that no one currently alive will ever live to reach. The first generation volunteers, with their eyes open, knowing the cost. But the middle generations do not volunteer, they inherit. They are simply born into the middle of someone else's 1,000-year promise, asked to spend their whole lives keeping faith with the dead and labouring for the unborn. And somewhere in those long, dark, silent centuries, a single generation might simply stop believing. They might decide the mission is a lie, or a cruelty, or a cage. Or, more quietly and more terribly, they might simply forget that it was ever there at all. The writers who have thought hardest about this have imagined the nightmare version, and it is one of the most haunting ideas in all of science fiction. They imagine a ship where, after enough centuries, the people have forgotten they are on a ship, where the metal walls are simply understood to be the edges of the world, the way the sky is the edge of yours, where the great control room with its long-dead instruments has become a temple, and its gauges and levers are worshipped without any understanding of what they once did, where a priesthood tends the sacred machines with rituals whose original purpose was maintenance, now emptied of all meaning. A crew that no longer knows the ship is a ship, tending a fire whose reason was forgotten generations ago, sailing on and on toward a star that not a single soul aboard remembers, is the entire point of their existence. The ship might fly perfectly, silently, flawlessly, its machines humming along exactly as designed, carrying a civilization that has completely forgotten it is going anywhere. It becomes a ghost of a purpose, alive but aimless, a message still crossing the dark long after the sender forgot what it was trying to say. And there are harder problems still, ones with no clean or comfortable solution. How do you govern a world that no one can ever leave? On Earth, however bad things get, there has always been the idea of somewhere else. People flee. They emigrate. They cross a border, start over in a new land, escape a tyrant or a famine or a war. That release valve, the simple existence of an elsewhere, has shaped every society we have ever built. On the ship there is no elsewhere. There is no border to cross, no new land over the sea. Every disagreement, every injustice, every clash of belief and desire happens inside a single sealed metal world, among the same few thousand people who must find a way to live together, and to keep living together, and to raise children who will also have to live together, for century after century after century. A single generation that governs itself badly, that falls into a war over the ship's careful resources, that lets its knowledge decay or its unity shatter, could quietly doom every generation that comes after it. There is no reset button. There is no starting over. There is only the slow, patient, unforgiving accumulation of every single choice made along the entire length of the voyage, each one landing on the shoulders of the people not yet born. This is why some of the people who have studied this idea most deeply have come to a surprising conclusion. They say the very hardest part of building a generation ship is not the metal, or the engines, or the air, or the food. It is building a culture that can survive its own centuries. A way of remembering that does not fade with the generations. A story about who these people are and why they are here that is strong enough to be handed down, intact and believed and alive, across 40 generations of children, without ever once breaking or dissolving or curdling into myth. Because the ship can have perfect air and perfect gravity and perfect farms and a perfect shining path to a perfect distant world, and it can still fail. Completely, quietly, not with an explosion, but with a shrug. It can fail simply because the people inside it, one ordinary generation at a time, forgot why they were ever there. And all the while, that fragile, forgetful, beautiful little world is not sitting safely in a calm harbour. It is crossing the most hostile territory that exists anywhere in the universe. And the dark it moves through is not empty. It only looks that way from here. We call it empty space. But that is one of the great misunderstandings of our age. The space between the stars is not truly empty, and it is very far from truly safe. To the ship moving through it for century after century, it is not a peaceful void. It is a slow, endless, invisible storm that never once lets up. Start with the radiation. Out here, beyond the shelter of any planet's magnetic field, beyond the thick protecting blanket of any atmosphere, the universe is filled with a constant, invisible sleet of high-energy particles moving at tremendous speed. Some of it comes streaming from our own sun, especially when the sun has one of its violent outbursts, flinging a wave of radiation across the solar system. But the most dangerous of all comes from far outside our galaxy, from the shattered remains of stars that exploded long ago and far away. These are atomic particles, the broken cores of atoms, flung across the cosmos at very nearly the speed of light, carrying so much energy that nothing we build easily stops them. On Earth, you are protected from almost all of this, and you have never had to think about it for a moment. Our planet's magnetic field, that invisible shield stretching tens of thousands of miles into space, deflects most of the charged particles. And the thick blanket of our atmosphere, miles deep, absorbs almost all the rest. That double shield is the only reason you can lie on a beach in the sunshine and risk nothing worse than a sunburn. But strip that shield away, take the ship out into the naked dark between the stars, and this radiation becomes a quiet killer. It tears through living tissue like a hail of microscopic bullets, moving so fast and carrying so much energy that it rips through cells, breaking apart the delicate molecular machinery inside them, snapping the very strands of genetic code that tell your body how to build and repair itself. A single day of it might do no visible harm, but over years the damage accumulates. It raises the risk of cancer with every passing month, and over generations, without protection, it could slowly and steadily damage the very DNA that the entire ship exists to carry safely across the void, corrupting the human inheritance the mission is trying so desperately to deliver, so that the people who finally arrive are sicker and more broken than the ones who set out. So the ship must be armoured, not with weapons, but with sheer heavy mass. There is no clever trick, no thin magic barrier that reliably stops this kind of radiation. The only thing that truly works is to put a great thickness of ordinary material between the people and the void, and simply let that material soak up the particles before they reach living flesh. That means meters upon meters of metal, or great tanks of water wrapped all the way around the living quarters like a shell, because water, layered thickly enough, is a wonderful shield. And the ship needs to carry vast amounts of it anyway. Or, best of all, rock, which is exactly why some dreamers imagine hollowing out an entire asteroid and living deep inside the stone, letting a whole mountain's worth of solid rock absorb the radiation the way Earth's atmosphere does for us. But all of that shielding, the metal and the water and the rock, is enormously heavy. And in space, weight is the enemy of everything. Every single ounce of shielding is an ounce that must be pushed across the light years, an ounce that demands more fuel, more energy, more of everything, an ounce that makes the whole nearly impossible journey a little more impossible still. Then there is the dust, and here the danger of space changes character entirely, from a slow poison into something sudden and violent. The space between the stars is not perfectly clean. It is scattered, very thinly, with a fine haze of gas and tiny grains of dust, and the occasional small fragment of rock. On Earth, at Earth's gentle speeds, these specks would be nothing at all, less than nothing, invisible motes drifting in a sunbeam. But the ship is not moving at Earth's speeds. Even a modest generation ship, one that has resigned itself to a 1,000-year voyage, might be crossing space at tens of thousands of miles per hour. And at those speeds, a collision with even a tiny speck of matter is not gentle at all. A single grain of dust, no bigger than a mote of sand, struck at that velocity, carries the punch of a bullet. A pebble carries the energy of a bomb, and the faster the ship travels to shorten the journey, the worse this becomes, until at the very highest speeds we can imagine, even the thin scattered gas of interstellar space becomes a searing wall of radiation slamming endlessly into the front of the vessel, a headwind made of the galaxy itself. So the ship must not only be armoured against the radiation you cannot see coming from all directions, it must also carry a great thick shield facing forward, a heavy barrier at its very bow, to absorb the endless, relentless bombardment of everything it sweeps up in its path. For 1,000 years, the front of the ship is being sandblasted by the galaxy, grain by grain by grain, struck millions upon millions of times, and it must never, not once in all those centuries, be worn all the way through. There is a strange and terrible loneliness in that image, if you let yourself really see it. A world sealed and warm and glowing with life inside, full of children and gardens and sleeping seeds, pushing forever into the dark, its face turned into an endless silent storm, taking hit after hit after hit, so that everything precious behind it can stay safe and whole. No one on earth will ever see it happen. No one will ever know how many uncountable impacts that forward shield absorbed, how many billions of tiny violences it swallowed in the dark. It simply endures for century after century, entirely alone, so that the world it carries can live. And this is the reality those people would live inside, though they might rarely think of it. Not the clean, quiet, peaceful space of our imaginations, the black velvet dotted with friendly stars, but a genuinely hostile place, a medium that has to be fought, silently and ceaselessly, every single second of every single day, for longer than all of recorded history. Radiation pressing in on every side, dust and gas screaming against the bow, cold so deep and so total that it defies all understanding, only a few degrees above the absolute bottom of all temperature, the point where all motion stops. And through all of it, holding on, that one small fragile bubble of warmth and light and air and life, that little garden in a bottle, refusing to die. But let's say they make it. Let's say every loop holds. The air stays breathable for 1,000 years. The spin never once falters. The farms never fail. The bloodline never narrows into ruin. The people never forget who they are or why they came. And the great shield at the bow endures every last impact without ever being breached. Let's say after 1,000 years and 40 generations, the ship finally arrives. Here is the cruelest twist of the entire story, the one that almost no one thinks about when they first dream of these ships. Arrival itself might be the beginning of the greatest heartbreak of the whole voyage. Picture it. 40 generations have lived and died in flight. The ship, still slowly turning, still glowing softly with its little sun, finally begins to slow as it approaches the star its ancestors aimed for so long ago, a star that was nothing but a faint point of light in the sky of Earth when the journey first began. The people aboard now, the great-great-great-grandchildren of the ones who left, gather at the windows to see with their own eyes the thing their entire civilization was built to reach. A new world, a second Earth, the promise at the far end of 1,000 years of faith, of sacrifice, of 40 generations who lived and died so that this single moment could happen. And it might be wrong. Remember how the target was chosen. It was picked 1,000 years earlier, from Earth, using telescopes that could barely detect the planet at all. For us, tonight, finding a planet around another star does not mean seeing it. We almost never see these worlds directly. Instead, we watch a distant star, patiently, for a long time, and we notice that once in a while its light dims by the tiniest fraction, as something passes in front of it. From that flicker, that shadow of a shadow, we work out that a planet must be there, and we make careful guesses about its size and its distance from its star, and whether it might, possibly, be the kind of place where liquid water could exist. That is the finest science we can do. but it means the world at the end of the journey was chosen from a smudge of data, a rhythmic little dip in a star's brightness, a best and hopeful guess made across 25 trillion miles at a planet no one could ever truly see. And the people who chose it bet 40 generations of human lives on being right. They might not have been. The planet that looked so promising from Earth, that gentle dip in the starlight that seemed to whisper of a second home, might, up close, turn out to be a frozen ball of rock, its surface hundreds of degrees below freezing, or a scorched desert, baked airless and dead. Or, most cruelly of all, a world that looks beautiful from a distance, blue and inviting, but whose air is a poison that would kill a human in a single breath, or whose surface is racked by a radiation its own star pours down without mercy. The ship might arrive after all those centuries, after all those lives, to find that the promised land was never there at all, that they had crossed an ocean of dark to reach a mirage, and there would be no going back. The journey was one way. The fuel is spent, the centuries are spent, the 40 generations are spent and gone. They would find themselves 1,000 years from Earth, drifting at a dead and useless world with nowhere left to go and nothing left to do but live out their lives in the ship that was only ever meant to be the road and not the home. And there is a second cruelty, stranger and quieter than the first, and it has a name. It is sometimes called the weight calculation, and it haunts everyone who dreams seriously about crossing the stars. Suppose you build your generation ship and launch it at the very best speed your century can manage. It will take, let us say, 1,000 years to arrive. That is the deal you have accepted. But here is the trap. In those 1,000 years back on Earth, humanity does not stop. It keeps learning. It keeps inventing. And a few centuries after your ship departs, crawling patiently through the dark, someone back home invents a better engine, a faster ship. And that faster ship, launched long after yours, from a civilization far more advanced than the one you left, overtakes you somewhere in the middle of the void. It sails right past your descendants, arrives at the destination first, and settles the very world your ancestors gave everything to reach. Your people, still generations away from their goal, might look out through their windows one ordinary evening and see a ship they never knew existed, crewed by people whose grandparents had not even been born when your voyage began, gliding past them toward the finish line, on their way to claim the prize first. The entire 1,000-year sacrifice, every life and every death and every faithful generation, overtaken and made meaningless by a single afternoon of someone else's cleverness, a few 100 years too late for your people to have ever known. These are not the distant, fanciful worries of dreamers. They are the sober, sobering questions that make the generation ship the single hardest journey ever seriously imagined by the human mind. It is not enough to survive the crossing, as impossibly hard as that already is. You also have to be right about where you are going, right about a world you can barely see, betting everything on a flicker of starlight. And you have to be lucky enough that no one back home ever finds a shortcut behind you. You have to place a bet of unimaginable size, in pure faith, and then live and die and raise 40 generations of children before you or any of them ever learns whether the bet was won or lost. There has never been an act of trust like it in all of human history, and there may never be another. To build an entire living world and launch it into the endless dark and stake everything you are and everything all your descendants will ever be on a single smudge of light 1,000 years away. And now, at the very end of all this, having built this impossible ship together, piece by terrifying piece, let me tell you the strangest thing of all. The thing that ties this whole distant dream back to the ground beneath your own feet, right now, tonight, wherever you are lying in the dark. We have spent this entire journey imagining a spaceship that has to become a world. A single sealed vessel with a strictly limited supply of air and water and soil, carrying a small and fragile population through a vast and hostile dark. With no help coming and nowhere else to go, its people utterly dependent on a life support system they did not build, cannot leave, and mostly do not even understand. A closed world spinning steadily through space that must keep its perfect delicate balance for 1,000 years, or every soul aboard will die. You are on that ship right now, because that is exactly, precisely what Earth is. Stop for a moment and look at what our planet actually does, stripped of the familiarity that has made it invisible to you. It carries you through space right now at around 67,000 miles an hour, endlessly circling our star. And our star is not still either. It is racing around the centre of our galaxy, dragging Earth and everything on it along with it at something like 500,000 miles an hour through the same cold dark that our imagined ship must cross. You feel none of it. You feel perfectly still. But you are moving faster than any bullet, faster than any spacecraft, on a journey you never chose and cannot stop. Earth gives you a fixed supply of air, no larger than the thin shell you can see as a pale blue line on the horizon at sunset, and it recycles that air endlessly through its forests and oceans in a closed loop. The same loop our ship must so carefully rebuild. It gives you a fixed supply of water, the same water dinosaurs drank, cycling forever through rain and river and cloud, and never once added to from outside. It wraps you in a thin blanket of atmosphere and an invisible magnetic field that together shield you from the very same deadly radiation our generation ship fears so much. And it carries a population that is born and lives and dies and is born again, generation after generation after generation, 10,000 deep, almost none of them ever once stopping to think about the machine that holds them alive, almost all of them simply assuming, exactly the way you assumed before tonight, that the air and the water and the gentle steady gravity will always simply be there. Earth is a generation ship. It is the original one. It is the one that actually works. It has been carrying its passengers, all of life, every creature that has ever crawled or swum or flown or walked, on a voyage with no destination at all, for 4.5 billion years. And we are its current crew. We did not choose to board. We were born into it, 10,000 generations deep, in the middle of a voyage that began unimaginably long before us, and will continue long, long after we are gone. We look up at the glowing light in our sky and we call it the sun, because it is the only sun we have ever had, exactly as the children on our imagined ship would call their strip of light the sun. And most of us live our entire lives, from the first breath to the last, without ever once truly realizing that we are already passengers on a sealed and fragile world, hurtling through the very same cold dark that we were so afraid of, all through this long night together. The difference, the only real difference, is scale. Our ship is bigger, far, far bigger. Our biosphere is older and more forgiving, tested and balanced by billions of years instead of assembled by engineers in a single lifetime. Our seed bank is not a frozen vault in the hold, but the entire teeming living planet, every forest and reef and grassland a backup of life. And that vastness, that ancient generosity, has fooled us. It has fooled us into believing that the supply is endless, that the loops can never break, that no small overlooked failure could ever quietly begin to steal our air the way it stole the air of Biosphere 2. But the little glass world in the Arizona desert teaches us otherwise. The starving farmers who leaned too hard on a single crop teach us otherwise. The astronauts whose bones dissolved in the weightless dark teach us otherwise. Every single lesson we would have to learn to keep a generation ship alive is a lesson we are, slowly and sometimes painfully, having to learn about the one we are already riding. So maybe the real reason to dream so carefully about that far-off ship, that spinning world crossing the void toward a distant star, is not really about the stars at all. Maybe it is a mirror. Maybe the whole point of imagining, in such loving and terrible detail, how you would keep a small world alive for 1,000 years, is that it finally teaches us how to truly see the large one. To notice the air, and how precious and how thin it is. To notice the water, and that there is no more of it coming. To notice the impossible, silent, perfect machine that has been holding us in its hands since before we were born, asking nothing of us in return, and to feel, perhaps for the very first time, wide awake in the dark, how rare and how fragile and how utterly irreplaceable it truly is. And here, as the ship falls quiet, and the glowing spine of light dims toward its scheduled evening, is where the dread gives way, at last, to something softer. Because it is a strange and lonely thing, at first, to realize you are only a passenger on a fragile world adrift in an endless dark. But it is also, if you let it be, one of the deepest comforts there is. You are not standing on solid, separate ground, cut off and alone in the universe. You are part of a crew. Every single person who has ever lived, every person alive tonight, everyone you love and everyone you have lost, and everyone you will never meet, is aboard the same ship as you, breathing the same recycled air, warmed by the same small sun, held gently to the ground by the same quiet, patient world. We are all making the very same voyage, all of us, at the same time, together, on the same ship, with not a single soul left behind. And there is a kind of wonder in that, running far deeper than the fear ever did. Out of all the cold and the empty dark we have imagined together tonight, out of all the trillions of miles of nothing, this one small ship, our Earth, woke up. It grew oceans, and then it grew forests, and then, astonishingly, out of the mud and the water, it grew eyes and minds, and it began, through creatures like us, to look around and to wonder at where it was. You are the part of the ship that became aware of the voyage. You are the crew that learned at long last to read the instruments, to measure the distances, to look out at the dark and feel awe instead of only fear. In all the vast and silent emptiness we have crossed tonight, that may be the single rarest thing of all. A world that came alive, and then, against all odds, came awake, and lay in the quiet dark of an ordinary night, and thought softly about the stars. So there is no need tonight to be afraid of the smallness, or the distance, or the dark. You are exactly where you are meant to be. You are aboard the one ship in all the endless void that we know, for certain, is alive. You are on a journey that none of us ever chose, in the good and gentle company of everyone who has ever lived. The air is holding. The loops are turning. The spin is steady beneath you. And the little sun, faithful as ever, will rise again in the morning, just as it always has. There is nothing you need to do tonight, and nowhere you need to be, but here, safely aboard, carried through the kind dark by a world that has never once, in 4.5 billion years, let its passengers fall. So let go, now. Let the great ship carry you, the way it always has, the way it always will. The world is turning, slowly and surely, through the quiet between the stars. And you are safely aboard. Sleep now. You are home, and you always have been. Good night, and may your dreams reach for the stars.